Good afternoon. I wish to dedicate this brief learning to the refuah shlema, the continued healing of Rabbi Yaakov Nagen, Yaakov Meir ben Ahuva. He suffered a brain aneurysm earlier this week. Thank God he was rushed to the hospital and underwent emergency surgery, which was successful. And his family's reported that he is awake and communicating, and thank God is everyone is very hopeful for a positive outcome. But he still could use our prayers, and I think in his merit we'll learn some of his Torah. He's a faculty member at Yeshivat Otniel. He's also very active as a peace activist and an interfaith dialogue in Israel and internationally, and a really creative, original thinker. Maybe some of you have seen me with his book on essays on Parashat Shavua, Literary Yom Chadash, which also exists in English translation with a slightly different title. So I thought I would share what he has to say about Parashat Devarim, again in his zchut this Shabbat. He notes that Parashat Devarim is the parasha of Tochacha. It's a parasha that's always read prior to Tisha B'Av, and the parsha and the book is an embodiment of Moshe's rebuke of the people prior to his death. And this book then therefore can serve as a kind of paradigm for how one engages in rebuke. The Yehudi of Pshischa, a Hasidic Rebbe of renown, used to read verses from Devarim every day because he felt it epitomized words of rebuke, and he thought this way maybe they could penetrate into his heart. So Rabbi again notices a couple of themes about Sefer Devarim and the way that Moshe rebukes his people. Number one, he waits until a positive moment to offer those words of rebuke. The Torah tells us precisely when Moshe began to speak Sefer Devarim, share those words of the book of Deuteronomy, and it's after they were victorious, after the Israelites had defeated Og Melech HaBashan in battle, and that feeling of victory, that feeling of satisfaction, that was when it was appropriate to say some words of rebuke, not strike when the iron is hot, but strike when the iron is cold. Okay, wait until people are feeling full, and that's when they may be more open to hearing the rebuke. Another point that Rabbi again notices is that the rebuke is infrequent. Okay, in Sefer Shmot and Vayikra and Midbar, Moshe very rarely rebukes the Israelites, and he waits for the right moment, not just in terms of timing, but also in terms of quantity of rebuke. He's measured. And Rabbi again mentions a classroom teacher who says, when you yell at your students or you get angry at your classroom, imagine it's like a gun with two bullets. You can only get angry twice. Twice in the whole year, you can really show anger to students. Otherwise, it loses its force and it's just undisciplined, unprofessional, and not at all helpful. And another point that Rabbi again notes is that Moshe ends his rebuke with words of praise. That's also a very valuable lesson, right? The Sefer Devarim begins with Moshe's recounting of history with a strong emphasis on all the ways that the people let him down and how they let God down, but he ends Sefer Devarim with Zot HaBracha, with words of blessing for each of the Israelite tribes, and in that way also he sort of models the way the rebuke is given. Another lesson of rebuke, the Talmud says, just as one has an obligation to say something that will be heard, one has an obligation not to say that which won't be heard. And Rabbi again tells a very famous Hasidic story, which I've read in many other places. I'll share his version. That Hasidic Rebbe went to visit a wealthy man in the town where he lived. It's one of the early visions to Rebbe's, and he knocked on the door. He went with his attendant. He knocked on the door, and he's open. The door's opened by a butler who invites him into this very wealthy man's house, and he sits down in his living room, and didn't understand. The wealthy man comes down to Greece to meet the Rebbe. Didn't understand why. Wasn't expecting this visit. But the Rebbe was an important man in the town. Everyone, whether or not they had a regular relationship with him, understood that he was important. And so he received his visitor, and he sat down with him and offered him tea. The Rebbe didn't want tea. He just sat. And so this wealthy owner of this home just waits for the Rebbe to share what his mission was about. And the Rebbe said nothing. And the man waited and waited and waited, and after about 20 minutes of silence, the Rebbe got up and he left. And the butler, went to the Rebbe's attendant and said, "What was this about? What's going on?" And the attendant said, "I don't know." The shaman said, "I don't know. He just insisted that we visit this home, and he didn't tell me why." And so the wealthy man himself who ran after the Rebbe and said, well, what's going on? Like, why did you come to my house and to say nothing? And the Rebbe did continue not to answer him, and he followed him another few blocks. Finally, the Rebbe said, listen, the Talmud says there is a mitzvah to say that which will be heard. There's also a mitzvah not to say that which won't be heard. And you're not going to listen to what I have to say, so I didn't say it. And he continued to walk. So the man was very offended and taken aback and said, what do you mean I'm not going to hear what you have to say? How can you presume that? I will listen to what you have to say. You can say it, like just tell me already. And after some effort, the Rebbe conceded and said, okay, there's a woman, an old woman, a widow. She lives in our town, and your bank is about to foreclose on her home, and she'll be left homeless. And I want you to do something about it. And this wealthy man, who indeed was a banker, said, you don't understand. She doesn't owe me the money personally. She owes the money to the bank. I'm just a manager at the bank. It's not my debt that I can forgive. And the Rebbe said, exactly. That's why I didn't say anything to you, because I knew you wouldn't listen. And he walked away. And the banker was so shaken by this encounter that he himself paid off this woman's debt out of his own private funds, and she was saved from foreclosure. Wish you all Shabbat Shalom and a easy fast over Tisha B'Av. We have a very full schedule of ways to engage with the themes of the day and some of the sadness of the day, and so please pay attention to the bulletin and the website and take part in all the ways that we're making available. All right, best wishes to you all. Shabbat Shalom.